Part 1. The Forgotten Protocol. The Last Transmission. The message arrived at the Galactic Council chambers on a Tuesday, though time meant little to the beings who governed 3,000 worlds. Ambassador Zephyr's face filled the holographic display, his usually calm features twisted with desperation. Behind him, the sky burned orange with the fires of his dying world. This is Ambassador Zephyr of the Kythera Republic, requesting immediate assistance. The Nexari Empire has breached our borders with full military force. Our cities are falling. Our people are dying. We invoke Article 7 of the Galactic Protection Accord. The transmission cut to static. In the Grand Chamber, 67 species sat in perfect silence. Council Speaker Valdris, a towering insectoid being, finally spoke with mechanical precision. The request is noted. However, the Kythera-Nexari conflict falls under internal regional dispute classification. The non-interference protocol remains in effect. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably, others nodded in agreement. The Kythera had always been peaceful. Their technology focused on art and philosophy rather than war. They posed no strategic value to any major power. Their extinction would barely register in galactic politics. But there was one empty seat in the chamber. A chair that had remained vacant for 15 years marked with a simple plaque. Earth, status, withdrawn. The Forgotten World, 15 years. Earlier, humanity had stormed out of the Galactic Council after a heated debate over mining rights in the Andromeda sector. They had called the council corrupt, spineless, and morally bankrupt. Most species had laughed. Earth was a small world with limited resources and a short galactic history. They would come crawling back within a decade. They never did. Earth went silent. Trade routes to human space were quietly closed. Diplomatic channels went dark. Some wondered if humans had destroyed themselves in one of their frequent wars. Others assumed they had retreated into isolation, licking their wounds and accepting their place as a minor species. None of them were right. On the Lunar Command Station, orbiting Earth, General Marcus Webb stared at the intercepted transmission from the Kythera homeworld. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his hands clenched into fists. Behind him, his staff waited in tense silence. "How long do they have?" Webb asked. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, his aide and the youngest captain in Earth's history, checked her datapad. Intelligence suggests complete planetary occupation within 72 hours. The Nexari aren't interested in conquest. They want resources. They'll strip mine the planet and relocate the population to labor camps. Webb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 15 years of preparation. The council won't act? Non-interference protocol. Same as always. Chen's voice carried barely controlled anger. They'll watch an entire species die and call it politics. Webb turned to face his staff. These men and women had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, though none of them had known it at the time. While the galaxy assumed Earth was licking its wounds, humanity had been evolving. "Prep the fleet," Webb said quietly. "All of it. The fleet that shouldn't exist. The Earth Defense Coalition fleet was supposed to be a joke. The last intelligence reports from 15 years ago had cataloged 30 primitive warships and a handful of defensive platforms. The galactic community had dismissed them as barely capable of defending their own solar system. They were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the EDF Defiant Dawn, humanity's flagship. Around her, the largest fleet in human history, prepared for departure. 250 vessels of war, each one a testament to human ingenuity and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The ships looked nothing like traditional galactic vessels. Where other species built elegant, curved designs that prioritized efficiency and aesthetics, human ships were angular, brutal, and practical. They bristled with weapons that shouldn't exist, powered by reactors that defied conventional physics, and equipped with technology that had been theoretical just 20 years ago. "Final system checks complete," reported Commander Elena Vasquez from the engineering station. All ships report ready for jump. Chen nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the Kythera system. Red markers indicated Nexari fleet positions. Blue dots marked the locations of known Kythera cities. Too many of those dots were already flashing red. "Captain," came a voice from the communications array. It was General Webb, calling from Earth. "Command. You understand the implications of what we're about to do?" "Yes, sir. We're violating about 50 interstellar treaties and declaring ourselves enemies of a galactic empire." "That's right, and..." Chen smiled grimly. "And we're going to save a species that can't save itself because that's what humans do." "Damn right. Bring them home, Captain." The channel closed. Chen turned to her crew, seeing the determination in their faces. These people had trained their entire careers for a mission like this. Not to defend Earth, but to defend the defenseless. "All ships, this is Captain Chen. Today we remind the galaxy that humanity didn't retreat 15 years ago. We prepared. Jump in 3, 2, 1. The silent arrival space around the Kythera homeworld was a graveyard. Nexari dreadnoughts hung in orbit like mechanical vultures, their weapon systems trained on the planet below. Smaller vessels darted between the continents, their cargo holds full of stolen resources and captured civilians. On the planet's surface, Elder Theiss knelt in the ruins of what had been the Great Library, a structure that had stood for 3,000 years. Around him, the survivors of his people huddled in underground shelters waiting for the inevitable. The Kythera were a peaceful species. Their bodies were tall and graceful, their skin a soft blue-gray that changed hue with their emotions. They had never developed weapons of war, never needed to. Their philosophy taught that violence was the last refuge of the desperate and the ignorant. They were learning that philosophy had its limitations. This closed his eyes and began the traditional prayer for the dying. His people would not survive the next day. The Nexari had made that clear. But perhaps their knowledge, their art, their songs would be remembered somewhere in the galaxy. Above the planet, Nexari Overlord Kraxus stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching the final stages of the occupation. The Kythera had proven disappointingly easy to conquer. Their defensive satellites had been swept aside in minutes. Their civilian fleet had fled or been destroyed. Now came the profitable part, strip mining a world. "Sir," called his tactical officer, "we're detecting anomalous readings at the edge of the system." Kraxus barely glanced at the display. "Debris from the defense platforms. Continue operations." "Sir, I don't think..." The tactical officer never finished his sentence. Space itself seemed to tear open as 250 human warships dropped, out of hyperspace in perfect formation. They appeared not at the system's edge where military protocol demanded, but in close orbit around the planet, weapons already charging. Kraxus stared at the impossible sight. The ships were unlike anything in his databases. Their design was alien, aggressive, and somehow terrifying. More importantly, they shouldn't exist. According to all intelligence, Earth was a backwater world with a primitive fleet. "Sir," his communications officer said in a shaking voice, "we're receiving a transmission. Put it through." Captain Sarah Chen's face appeared on the main screen. Her expression was cold, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its calm certainty. "Nexari forces, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Coalition. You are in violation of the sovereign space of the Kythera Republic. You have 1 minute to begin withdrawal, or we will interpret your presence as an act of war against humanity." Kraxus laughed, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. "Earth has no authority here, human. Your pathetic world isn't even a member of the Galactic Council." Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. "You're right. We're not bound by their rules anymore." The transmission ended. Around the planet, human ships powered their weapons. The Nexari had 1 minute to make a decision that would change the galaxy, forever. But Overlord Kraxus had built his reputation on conquest and intimidation. He had never retreated from an inferior force, and he wasn't about to start with a species he considered primitive. "All ships, attack formation. Show these humans what happens when children play with adult weapons." On the surface of the Kithara, homeworld, Elder Thais felt the ground vibrate as massive engines fired in the void above. He looked up through the ruins of his library's dome and saw lights moving across the stars. For the first time in days, he dared to hope. When worlds collide, the battle began with mathematics. Human ships didn't charge forward in a glorious assault. They didn't issue challenges or demand surrender. They simply calculated the most efficient way to neutralize threats and executed their plan with mechanical precision. The Nexari fleet outnumbered the humans 3-1. They had larger ships, more experienced crews, and weapons that had conquered a dozen worlds. What they didn't have was 15 years of desperate innovation, driven by the knowledge that they would someday stand alone against the galaxy. Human weapons fired in perfect synchronization. Plasma beams that burned hotter than stellar cores punched through Nexari shields like they were paper. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to near-light speed turned armored hulls into expanding clouds of debris. Most terrifying of all were the gravitational distortion weapons that simply crushed enemy ships into singularities. Overlord Kraxus watched his fleet die with growing horror. His tactical displays showed impossible readings. Human ships were moving faster than their engines should allow, turning tighter than physics permitted, and firing weapons that drew more power than their reactors could generate. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. His science officer's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, I think they've been lying about their capabilities. For years, maybe decades." On the EDF Defiant Dawn, Captain Chen coordinated the battle with calm efficiency. Her crew worked in silent harmony, each person knowing their role in humanity's first major military action in 15 years. "Nexari flagship is trying to withdraw," reported Commander Vasquez. "Let them," Chen replied. "But make sure they understand the message." A single human destroyer broke formation and pursued the retreating flagship. It didn't attack immediately. Instead, it paced the massive Nexari vessel, demonstrating that it could have destroyed the enemy at any time. Only when the flagship reached the edge of the system did the destroyer fire a single shot across its bow. The message was clear. "We could have killed you all. We chose not to. Remember that." Within 30 minutes, it was over. The Nexari fleet was destroyed or retreating. The Kithara homeworld was free, and the galaxy had just learned that humanity was no longer the insignificant species they remembered. But this was only the beginning. When humanity remembers, the aftermath of Mercy, the Mayo. Silence that followed the battle was more terrifying than the combat itself. Debris from Nexari warships drifted through space like metallic snow, while the surviving enemy vessels limped toward the system's edge. On the surface of the Kithara homeworld, millions of beings stared at the sky in disbelief. Elder Thys emerged from the ruins of the great library, his people gathering around him in confused clusters. The bombardment had stopped. The Nexari troops that had been herding civilians toward processing centers were now receiving frantic orders to withdraw. But most shocking of all were the ships in orbit, alien vessels that had appeared from nowhere to drive away an empire. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Defiant Dawn, watching the planet below. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, approached with a datapad full of damage reports. "Casualty report, Captain. We lost the destroyer Adamant and the cruiser Resilient. 43 crew members total. The Kithara. We estimate we saved about 4 million lives today." Chen nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "And tomorrow?" Morrison understood. They had won a battle, but they had also started a war. The Nexari Empire controlled over 60 star systems. The Galactic Council would demand explanations that Earth wasn't prepared to give. Most importantly, they had revealed capabilities that would make every major power in the galaxy view humanity as either a potential ally or a necessary enemy. "Captain," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the planet. It's the Kithara leadership." "Put it through." Elder Thys appeared on the main screen, his blue-gray skin shifting to deep purple hues that Chen's cultural briefings identified as profound gratitude. Behind him stood dozens of other Kithara, their tall, graceful forms radiating the same emotional resonance. "Captain Chen of Earth," this began, his voice carrying the weight of 3 millennia of civilization. "I am Elder Theiss of the Kythera Republic. On behalf of my people, I offer our deepest gratitude. You have saved us from extinction." Chen felt the weight of every eye on her bridge. This was uncharted territory, not just the first military action by the modern Earth Defense Coalition, but potentially the first alliance between humanity and an alien species in over 15 years. "Elder Theiss, we're honored to have been able to help. The Kythera are known throughout the galaxy for their contributions to art, philosophy, and peaceful coexistence. The universe would be a poorer place without your people." This is skin shifted to a warm golden hue. "You know of our ways? We've been watching, Elder. Humanity has spent the last 15 years learning about the galaxy we were told we didn't belong in. We've seen which species build and which destroy. We've seen which ones help and which ones merely observe." Chen's voice carried an edge of steel. "We chose to help the builders." The price of intervention. 3 days later, the political firestorm began. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, its chambers filled with angry delegates demanding explanations for humanity's unauthorized intervention. Council Speaker Valdris presided over the chaos with growing frustration. "The species known as humanity has violated 17 interstellar treaties," declared Ambassador Korath of the Nexari Empire, his scaled features twisted with rage. "They have committed an act of unprovoked aggression against a sovereign military operation. They must be sanctioned immediately." Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the assembly. The Nexari held significant influence in the council, and their trade networks were vital to dozens of worlds. But other voices rose in opposition. "Sovereign military operation?" scoffed Representative Zara of the Helix Federation. "You mean the systematic extermination of a peaceful species? The humans did what the rest of us should have done." "The law is clear," Valdris interrupted. "Non-interference in regional conflicts is fundamental to galactic stability. If every species began intervening in disputes they deemed unjust, we would have chaos. And if every species continues to stand by while genocide occurs," came a new voice, "we will have something worse than chaos. We'll have complicity." The voice belonged to Ambassador Marcus Reed, humanity's new representative to the Galactic Y Council. He walked into the chamber with measured steps, his presence commanding attention despite his species' supposedly inferior status. Behind him walked Captain Sarah Chen, still wearing her EDF uniform. 15 years ago, Reed continued, humanity left this council because we believed it had lost its moral authority. We hoped that time and perspective might prove us wrong. The Kythera crisis has demonstrated that we were, if anything, too optimistic. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted accusations, threats, and demands. Through it all, Reed and Chen stood, calmly waiting for the noise to subside. Valdris pounded his ceremonial staff for order. "Ambassador Reed, by what authority do you speak here? Earth forfeited its council membership." Reed smiled coldly. "By the authority of a species that just prevented genocide while the council debated protocol. By the authority of the only major power willing to act when action was needed. And by the authority of a military force that you apparently forgot existed." The chamber fell silent. Everyone present understood the implications. Humanity hadn't just saved the Kythera, they had revealed themselves as a major military power that operated outside the council's influence. "What do you want?" Valdris asked quietly. "We want nothing from you." Chen spoke for the first time, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "We want to offer something to the galaxy. Protection, for species too small to defend themselves, for worlds too distant to matter to the major powers, for anyone who needs help and can't get it through proper channels." "You're talking about destabilizing the entire galactic order," protested Ambassador Korath. "We're talking about providing an alternative to it," Reed replied. "The Council can continue its policies of careful neutrality and profitable non-interference. But when the next Kythera situation arises, they won't have to face it alone. The underground network While diplomats argued in the council chambers, a different kind of revolution was beginning in the galaxy's forgotten corners. The story of humanity's intervention had spread through unofficial channels, refugee networks, independent traders, and the countless species who existed at the margins of galactic civilization. On the mining world of Kepler 442, where the native Dulari had been reduced to slave labor in their own mines, the news arrived through a smuggler's radio. The broadcast was simple. If you need help and can't get it through official channels, transmit on frequency 127.4. Someone is listening. 3 systems away, on the agricultural world of New Harmony, colonists who had been abandoned by their corporate sponsors after a crop blight heard similar rumors. A human fleet existed, a human fleet that helped people who couldn't help themselves. The transmissions started slowly, a few desperate messages from isolated colonies, pleas from refugee camps that the council had forgotten, distress calls from species facing extinction that no major power cared to prevent. Each message was received by a network of listening posts that humanity had established throughout the galaxy during their 15 years of supposed isolation. Each one was carefully analyzed, investigated, and prioritized, and when the situation warranted intervention, the response was swift and devastating. The liberation of the Dulari mines took 6 hours. A single human cruiser arrived in orbit, disabled the corporate security fleet without destroying it, and broadcast mining safety regulations that the Dulari had never been told existed. The miners weren't just freed, they were educated about their rights under galactic law. The relief mission to New Harmony lasted 2 weeks. Human agricultural specialists worked alongside the colonists to develop blight-resistant crops, while human engineers repaired their failing infrastructure. When they left, New Harmony was more prosperous than it had ever been. Each intervention was different, but the pattern was the same. Humans didn't conquer or demand tribute. They solved problems and moved on. They left behind grateful populations, and more importantly, they left behind communications equipment tuned to frequency 1 to 27.4. The Cathara Renaissance. 6 months after their liberation, the Cathara homeworld had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a world rebuilding itself with human technology and Cathara wisdom. The partnership between the two species was producing innovations that neither could have achieved alone. Elder Thys stood in the reconstructed Great Library, but this version was far grander than the original. Human engineering had created a structure that could withstand orbital bombardment, while Cathara artisans had made it beautiful beyond imagination. The walls were covered with interactive displays showing the art and literature of both species, while human-designed fabricators produced books, sculptures, and musical instruments at unprecedented speed. "It's remarkable," said Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the human cultural liaison assigned to the project. "Your people's aesthetic sense combined with our manufacturing capabilities, we're creating art that neither species could imagine separately." Thys's skin showed warm golden hues of contentment. This is what cooperation should look like. Not the cold calculations of trade agreements, but the warm fusion of different strengths creating something new. The library was just one example. Across the planet, human technology was being adapted to Cathara sensibilities. Cities rose that were both efficient and beautiful, transportation systems that were both fast and environmentally harmonious, defense systems that could repel invasion while remaining invisible to peaceful visitors. But perhaps the most significant development was happening in the orbital shipyards. The first joint human Cathara vessels were taking shape, ships that combined human engineering with Cathara design philosophy. They were smaller than pure human warships, but faster and more elegant. More importantly, they carried crews from both species, working together with an efficiency that surprised everyone involved. Captain Chen visited the shipyards regularly, watching the construction of what would become the first vessels in humanity's growing alliance network. These ships wouldn't be operated by Earth alone. They would be crewed by representatives of every species that chose to join what was becoming known as the Liberation Coalition. "How many worlds have requested membership?" Chen asked Captain Maria Valdez, who had been assigned to coordinate the coalition's growth. 17 official requests, 43 informal inquiries, and about 100 worlds that are asking what they need to do to qualify, Valdez replied. The Council is starting to panic. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Galactic Council's authority had always rested on the assumption that there was no alternative to their system. Now there was, and it was growing faster than anyone had anticipated. Galaxy chooses sides. The crisis came exactly 1 year after the liberation of the Kythera homeworld. The Nexari Empire, humiliated by their defeat and angered by the growing influence of the Liberation Coalition, decided to make a statement. They assembled the largest fleet in their history and attacked 3 coalition worlds simultaneously. It was meant to be a demonstration of overwhelming force. Instead, it became a demonstration of how much the galaxy had changed. The Nexari fleet found the coalition worlds defended not just by human ships, but by vessels from a dozen different species. Kythera cruisers fought alongside human destroyers. Dulari mining ships had been converted into missile platforms. Even refugees from species that had no military tradition had volunteered to serve as support crews. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Nexari Expeditionary Force. But more importantly, it was broadcast live throughout the galaxy by a network of independent journalists that the coalition had been quietly supporting. For the first time in galactic history, ordinary beings could watch their protectors in action. They saw human marines fighting beside Kythera warriors to defend civilian evacuation sites. They saw ships from species that had been enemies for centuries working together against a common threat. They saw what cooperation looked like when it was built on shared values rather than mutual benefit. The political impact was immediate and devastating to the established order. Within days of the broadcast, 16 more worlds formally requested coalition membership. The Council's authority began to fragment as member species started questioning why they needed to obey an organization that wouldn't protect them. Ambassador Reed stood before the Council one final time, delivering humanity's formal resignation from all galactic treaties. "We came to you seeking partnership," he said. "You offered us subordination. We came seeking justice. You offered us bureaucracy. We came seeking protection for the innocent. You offered us profitable neutrality." He paused, looking around the chamber at delegates who had once dismissed his species as irrelevant. "Today we offer you a choice. Join us in building something better or continue maintaining something that no longer works." The chamber was silent as Reed and his delegation walked out. They wouldn't return. 6 months later, the Liberation Coalition controlled or protected over 200 worlds. The Galactic Council still existed, but its authority was limited to the species that chose to recognize it. For the first time in galactic history, there were 2 competing visions of how civilized species should interact. One was based on law, order, and non-interference. The other was based on justice, protection, and the radical idea that advanced species had a responsibility to help those who couldn't help themselves. The galaxy was learning that humanity, once dismissed as too primitive to matter, had grown into something far more dangerous than a military threat. They had become an inspiration, and inspiration, once kindled, was almost impossible to extinguish.